Hi, I'm Nicholas Britell, and we're here talking about If Beale Street Could Talk and Vice.
Thank you so much for meeting with me today. It's so great to...
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks. It's so funny to finally get to chat. We haven't had a conversation before. So.
I know. No, this is great. It's great to be here.
So to start, I would love to kind of find out kind of what your kind of background is and kind of your path to becoming a composer. So
Sure.
What was that first moment in your life that you remember that music found you, or that you found music, however you see it? And
Sure.
How did that turn into this career?
So actually the first real musical memory that I have is I saw Chariots of Fire when I was like 5 years old, and I was obsessed with the score. And it was amazing. And we had this very old upright piano in our apartment on West End Avenue in New York, and I went over to the piano and tried to figure out how to play the theme, and I kind of immediately asked my mom for piano lessons. So that was this, film music and the piano, it was all kind of connected in the very, very beginning of my own, connection to music in general. So I think that was really the very beginning. And then I did take piano lessons, and I became, sort of a concert pianist, I guess. I studied classical piano, and I would perform a lot. Started giving concerts when I was pretty young, actually. I was around 10 when I started giving sort of public concerts. And then I went to Juilliard for the pre-college division, from when I was 14 to 18, and, studied music there and piano performance. And I also started exploring jazz in high school, and then I started... I would play like cocktail music at hotels and bars and do that, which was awesome. I learned the pipe organ, so I used to play the pipe organ a lot. I played organ. And then in college, I joined a hip hop band. So I played in an instrumental hip hop band. It was 2 rappers and 6 instrumentalists. I was on keys, and I would write a lot of the music, and I would play keyboards and synthesizers. And then we had live drums, electric bass, electric guitar. We had a conga player. We had a DJ scratching live. We had 2 rappers. So I played with my band for about it was like 3 to 4 years, and we performed a lot. And then the band broke up. And while I was in college, actually, I started scoring friends' films. I had a very, very dear friend named Nick Lavelle who first approached me in, I guess it was like 2001, to score his feature film that he was making called Domino 1, which unfortunately never was released. But that was really the first film where, you can't be a film composer without a film. I think when you have a background, especially in classical music, the idea, there are these composers you're introduced to when you're really young, and they're so larger than life. It almost seems impossible to be like, oh, I could be a composer like these composers. You think about someone like Beethoven or Mozart, and they're they really are these sort of like iconic, immortal beings. So I never thought of myself as a composer. I always, I loved music, and I would play the piano, and I would write pieces, and then in college I would write music with my band all the time. And it wasn't until I was actually just writing music all the time because I loved it naturally, and it was just like a daily activity. That was when I started saying to myself, oh, am I a composer? Because I seem to be writing a lot of music all the time. I don't, so I think you sort of almost like, I don't know, at least for me, I kind of grew into that idea that maybe this was something that I could do. Because it does seem, it's hard. I think it's hard to almost imagine yourself as like, am I good enough to be able to be a composer? What does that mean?
But you always get to that point where I remember in film school, you want to be something, and then I remember one of my professors said, no, call yourself a filmmaker. But it's like, am I a filmmaker?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't feel comfortable. I wanted to be my entire life, but it's
exactly. It's a dream, and I love music, and I loved movies growing up. I would watch movies all the time, you know, and for me, actually, I think I really love that mixture of music and film. There's something that is really mysterious about the way that music interacts with a picture, and I don't think it'll ever cease being fascinating, because I just don't, I always feel there's no way to know what's going to happen when you put those things together. There is this sort of magical mystery of that combination, and I actually there's a lot of music that I think I like it even more when it's in a movie than when it's just on its own. There's something about the combination that's really kind of intoxicating. So
and score is such a weird concept to begin with, because it's like you never think of it like, oh yeah, just put music in there, but there's no music right now. We're not sitting here with an orchestra.
Right. What do you do?
Us.
Like, what do you do? It's an amazing question. No, it's an amazing question, because there's like, for any movie, there's infinite possible scores. Like, you could do anything actually.
Exactly.
And it's up to you and the director to somehow decide, what that's going to be, and there's a million different things that go into that equation. But like, it is an interesting enterprise.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you did kind of start scoring short films and some your friends' films, kind of
a lot, all the time.
When you started, was that kind of how you kind of got your mechanics and techniques kind of down before you started tackling bigger things?
Absolutely. I mean, there was, in college, actually, it was on that first film of Nick Lavelle that we spent so much time together. I mean, literally years we worked on that film together. I wrote hours and hours of orchestral music that was all sequenced on this like Korg Triton keyboard that I just was like layering all these tracks and coming, we had no budget, so I was just like, this is what we're doing. That was for, it was in that period of time that I think I started to experiment a lot. And it was his film, and we were, neither of us really knew what we were doing. So I think, you see different scenes, and you're just sort of like, there's two people on a rooftop, and there's some sort of confrontation that's about to happen. What do you do? Well, we could try this, and I was always fascinated with how the different music choices would immediately turn the scene into like a different genre.
Yeah.
Right away,
Exactly.
Like if you wanted to, it could be a comedy. If you wanted to, it could be a horror movie all of a sudden. If you wanted to, it was, which was just kind of mind-blowing that how immediately that was possible. Just by
music, it has that influence.
Had that impact, And then saying to ourselves, okay, we can do all these different things, but like, what do we actually want to do here? Like, what do we want to say here? Yeah. And that, so it was in those years, it was probably over that first 3-year period where I really started getting a sense of that. And I actually scored another film at that time, a friend's documentary. So I was playing with those ideas. And then over the next probably 5 years, I scored a lot of friends' short films.
Yeah.
I did kind of any type of project that would come my way. I did everything from short films to like, I wrote telephone hold music. I mean, I would,
That's amazing.
I loved it. It was great. I did whatever, It was really for fun.
Well, how much time do you have in a telephone hold music? How much music, like what's the looping point, I guess?
It's a good question. I just wrote a track that was like 3 minutes long.
Really?
And I just gave it to him. And then my friend, because a friend of mine worked at a restaurant, and he was like, look, I can get your music on the hold music. And I was like, and he was like, they're not going to pay you anything, but they'll like buy you dinner. And I was like, great, we're doing it. So I was like, I love it. So we did. So I wrote this music, and it was kind of like spa music. It's this very relaxing kind of ambient thing with piano. And then we sent it in, and I guess they liked it. And so all my friends would call into the restaurant and be like, they'd be like, hello. And my friends would be like, hi, can you please put me on hold? And I was like, appreciate your support.
That's amazing.
So that was my...
Your first concert, right?
That was like my first, that was some of my first public music was this, telephone hold. But it was great, you just sort of do whatever. And I guess the first projects that, had a larger potential audience was I was actually in a short film that Natalie Portman directed called Eve.
Right.
And I was the cocktail pianist playing music in a restaurant sequence in her film.
Wow.
With Lauren Bacall and Ben Gazzara, actually.
That's
so
amazing.
I was playing, and I played a piece that I'd written. So that was kind of I think that was the first music of mine that was in a movie that more people might potentially see.
Right.
And then I worked with Natalie again on the scene that she directed in the film New York, I Love You.
Exactly.
So so I wrote the music for that, and then I was lucky in a lot of ways because many of my friends from school wanted to be directors or producers, and so we would all kind of just try to work together and collaborate on projects. And a very dear friend of mine, Adam Leon, reached out to me about scoring his film Give Me the Loot. Right. And that was the first indie feature that I fully scored, I think. That was, and that came out we worked on that in 2000, that came out in 2012. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was the first sort of full feature that I worked on that was released.
I mean, 2012 was not that long ago. It kind
Wasn't
of
that long ago.
exploded.
Takes a lot of, but you know, it's funny because it's like there's so much work that I've done that has not come out. You know,
Exactly.
it's like exactly. You know, but it has been an amazing few years, and I just feel so lucky to get the chance to work with all the people that I work with.
Absolutely.
It's really been a dream of mine for so long, and you know, to actually get to score films, I still think it's amazing. So
one of the first projects that I kind of noticed your name, of course, was 12 Years a Slave.
Yes.
And so you did the additional music for the songs that were within the film.
So I did all the on camera.
Yeah.
So I wrote and researched all the diegetic music and arranged that music. I met Steve McQueen through Jeremy Kleiner at Plan B Entertainment, and I worked really closely with Steve on, you know, what is the sound of, you know, it was that first question actually that he posed was, you know, what is the sound of what music would an African American violinist be playing in New York State in 1841? So that was the question, and we dove into it. And so, you know, it was a huge amount of research. It was a huge amount of work, and it was that real close collaboration with Steve in getting a sense of what to the best of our ability could we ascertain was that sound of that time, but also filmically what was Steve looking for too. So it's that kind of combination of all the research plus what actually works for the director
and that
cinematically.
Scene,
exactly. So it was amazing, and Steve is just an unbelievable artist, and you know, that was a very really impactful and formative experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of great directors, you've worked with so many great directors, but Steve McQueen, but also Adam McKay was, you know, played a big part.
Yes,
has played a big part in your career.
No, absolutely.
And, so of course, The Big Short, which was a fantastic film, fantastic score. Now, of course, you're working with him again on Vice.
Yes.
So talk about working with Adam. What kind of director is Adam? Of course, a lot of people know him from his comedic background and working with Will Ferrell and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's making these kind of looks onto these kind of historic figures, these parts in American history.
Yeah.
So what is Adam like as a director, and what was it like working? Let's start with The Big Short. Starting on that film.
Adam is a joy to be around. He is, you know, as anyone might imagine, he's one of the funniest people you could possibly spend time with, and you know, and he's constantly doing bits, and there's, you know,
he's a writer too.
He's an incredible writer. He's an incredible writer. He's an incredible mind. I mean, he's got a brilliant mind, and he has such a wide-ranging set of interests. You know, but I think he has this fascinating combination of a very brilliant comedic genius, but he also has this very, very incisive analytical perspective on things, and he does the work. I mean, he does the reading, he researches things, you know, A to Z. So it's that kind of fascinating mixture that I think has you know, led him to the projects that he works on and to what those projects have become. But he's amazing to work with, and I met Adam through Jeremy Kleiner as well, Jeremy and Dee Gardner at Plan B, and it was on The Big Short that we first started to talk, and I remember the first thing he said to me when we spoke was, he said he was trying to figure out what is the sound of dark math.
Dark math.
Dark math. He's like, you know, because this story is really about like mathematics gone awry, you know? And so I love that kind of
because that's your job now. He says that.
That's your job.
Like,
your job what is you?
To translate that.
What do you do? You know? And I think that's great because each movie, the way I feel about stuff is each movie is its own adventure. You know, each movie is its own artistic, intellectual, emotional journey that you're going to go on, and that you want to figure this out. Like, what is that? And so I wrote this piece, which was like, I took like 6 pianos, and I had this idea when he said that of this concept that, like, if you had this math that was going awry and you're thinking about financial markets, there was this idea of creating a sound that felt like it had both instability and stability at the same time, you know? Sort of like interlocking matrices or something like that. And so I wrote this piece and I sent it to him, and he loved it. He was kind of like, you're hired. so that was crazy. And and I just started. That was while they were shooting the film.
Wow.
Actually, so I was sending him some of this stuff while he was in the process of making it, and then it was that summer of 2015 that I didn't know exactly how he wanted to proceed with actually the post process, and I flew out to LA because I live in New York, and I flew out to LA, and I met up with Adam and with Hank Corwin, who's our editor on the film, and I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but we just instinctively somehow started to like all sit in the same room and just work together. Like maybe it was because Adam, he brought me in really closely to the process of the actual editing of the film, and Hank wanted that as well. And so I actually had a room set up. I had like my keyboard and all my equipment, and I would like bring the keyboard into the editing room, and I would just like play stuff. And even while Hank was editing, I would be like, well, what if we did something like this? And so in real time, we were like trying stuff out, and it was just completely mind-blowing what we were able to accomplish in a short period of time, because there was like this instantaneous kind of mind meld that we were able to do together, and Hank sort of likened it to like playing jazz together, where it was like we were like improvising, we were trying things out, we were each kind of riffing off each other, and
but you'd get that feedback instantly
right
too.
away. I mean, the type of thing where like, let's say I had written a piece in New York, and then I spoke to Adam, and then I emailed it over, and then they listened to it, and then they came back. That whole process of let's say one piece, that could be like a week.
Yeah, exactly.
And we could accomplish that same process in 20 seconds, where we'd be like, nope. I'm like, cool, great, moving on. Don't worry about it. Try something else, So that was what was really fun about that. And we just kept at it. And we sort of, just explored it all really closely together. And it was after that experience that I think all of us, who are working in any field really, but I think especially a collaborative, creative field like film, I think we're all sort of trying to hone in on what is our process, what is the way that we feel most not only connected to the work, but also connected to how we make these works, and I think that summer really solidified for me the way that I felt most strongly, for me about that, and it was interesting because it was right after, it was that summer that I met Barry Jenkins, and when we first met up, Barry, we had this really kind of amazing multi-hour conversation about music and life and films, and but once we started working together, one of the first things he said to me was, how does this work? Like, how should we collaborate? Like, what's the best process?
Have a director ask that.
And I said to him, because I had just experienced that on The Big Short, I was like, here's how we're gonna do this. I was like, we're gonna meet up in the same room. We're gonna work in my studio together, and we're just gonna sit together, and we're gonna watch the movie together, and we're gonna be kind of together, and that's how this is gonna work, And it just felt so clear to me that was the right approach, and Barry was a great. So it's a long way of saying that it was that summer on The Big Short that I really feel that I learned so much about how I wanted to work on these films.
It was also rare to find other collaborators that kind of fit into that, because
totally, it was amazing. No, it was amazing, and again, like, they're incredible.
That's not the norm. Most composers would be watching this, like, what the hell?
Honestly, I don't. It was, they were open to me. They were open to me.
That's amazing.
I'm so lucky that they were. Because I can totally imagine a scenario where the director and the editor would be like, "Hey, it's cool. We're gonna work on this. We'll be in touch."
Here's your
and that would have been, that would have been what it was,
Right.
But they were actually like, "Why don't you come on in here?" And I was like, "Great. What do you want me to do?" So we sort of went on that process, and that was, and then so back to Adam. I mean, that was, on The Big Short. That was really how we proceeded that whole summer. And then since then, I next worked on Succession with Adam, and then we started talking about Vice pretty early on in his process of writing the script. So that was, a while ago.
Yeah.
And right from the very beginning, Adam had involved me in thinking about the sound and posing those same kind of questions.
Right.
With Big Short, maybe it was like, what's the sound of dark math? With Vice, it was more. I think it was this question of. Adam felt right from the very beginning that this story of Vice is such a big story.
Yeah.
It's not only the story of Dick Cheney, this person who has, and his life over many, many years, his rise through Washington and the repercussions of his actions, but it's also the story of America at the same time over the past 60 years, and in a lot of ways, it's sort of the world of the past 60 years. So because of the size of that story, Adam's initial instinct was, okay, we need to, we should have an orchestral, a symphonic scope for this score that is massive, because that's how big this story is. And so right from the very beginning, there was this idea of an orchestral approach, and a very large orchestral approach. And then we sort of, went from there as far as how we, executed it and how it evolved too.
So, I mean, you're dealing with Vice, these kind of people that, my age grew up with. I remember seeing Dick Cheney, seeing him speak, seeing Bush speak. So we have this image in our mind of who these people are. These are, current, still alive. They're still living political figures. So when you're dealing with that and you're having an actor's interpretation of that, I guess musically, how do you start fleshing them out and hopefully making the audience see them as a character rather than that figure we saw speaking and maybe beyond, for, not like an SNL impersonation of them.
Right. How do you make it all real? No, I think those are the big questions, like we were talking about earlier. It's like, what is that sound? Like, what is the sound of this film?
Right.
And part of it is those initial instincts and experimenting with them, but it's also, you don't really know until you're working with the footage, like you're saying.
Exactly.
And with Vice, I had this instinct. After Adam was talking about his view of the scope and the potential sound, I had this feeling that I was thinking about what is the idea of an American symphonic sound, and I think there is an idea of a large sort of American symphonic sound, and then I think we all have this idea of like, what is a hero's journey, like what does that sound like? Is it like a brass fanfare? What is that?
Right.
And my take was, well, this movie isn't those things necessarily. It's a different kind of a thing. I felt the score had to understand those ideas, but had to incorporate a dissonance into them, so that actually basically every single cue in the film, whatever the musical motif that's happening, there's always a few notes that are like wrong, so that you're always feeling something, which the hope was that you would it would make you look at things through a different lens, and realize that there is a dissonance throughout everything that's happening in the film, and there's a dissonance in maybe our understanding of the past 50 and 60 years and what's happened to this country, and where have we come to, etc. So that was the idea that there's a theme that I wrote for Dick, which is the theme I called it the lineman theme.
Yeah.
And that's the idea is that when he was young, he was actually worked the power lines in Wyoming. And, so there's this sound, this sort of trumpet, kind of a trumpet fanfare that I wrote for him. And yet there are these notes which are dissonant to the key that it's in, essentially. And what I found that was fascinating as I was working on it was that, as you get used to these dissonances, they start sounding normal to you.
Right.
And that's sort of also maybe an interesting metaphor for the past 50 years.
Or just currently the past 2 years.
Even, tragically.
Tragically.
No, and I think it's important for it not to feel normal.
Exactly.
That was the whole idea that it's always gonna, we're gonna be very clear on the dissonance, especially as the film evolves, and I think what's interesting too is, there are ways of being dissonant within the notes, but there's also ways of being dissonance even in the juxtaposition of things. So, for example, the fake ending of the film, that happens in the middle of the movie, that what you're seeing is, clearly there's elements of deep satire there.
Yeah.
And what you're feeling is, you're seeing the story of how, Dick's heart is healthier than ever. And the music is this incredibly lush, orchestral, perfect Hollywood ending, And so the music is not dissonant, and that's its own dissonance maybe is
exactly.
like what's wrong. Some things it actually feels the most wrong is that cue that I wrote. You know, you're like wait, that's totally not right. You know? So it was interesting thinking about those things, and in a lot of ways too. I think the question of the tonality of the project, I
think tone would be so difficult.
Very, very subtle, and having worked on Succession, where there's both an exploration of gravitas and what I felt was sort of like a level of absurdity that's happening at the exact same time, and trying to think about asking yourself the questions like, what are we doing here? What is the right sound there? How do we want to feel? And just trying to be very honest with yourself about like, well, is this working? Is that really what we want to feel? Because I think a lot of it is clearly about feelings in all these moments. Whatever the movie is, whatever the moment is, it's just like, what are we supposed to feel here?
Exactly.
And no matter what the music is, or no matter what how great the piece is, its success or failure is really about like, is it saying the right thing here for us? And that's the question. I mean, that's why I feel working so closely with directors is helpful, because writing the music is its own enterprise, but film scoring is about what's the right music. So it's like, that's the thing that you can only discern from the director.
We were, of course, just talking about working with Adam McKay. Let's move to another fantastic director, Barry Jenkins.
Sure.
So when you worked with, of course, you scored Moonlight, which won Best Picture, which I think, even though you didn't win Best Score, I think it's a huge compliment that you're, for everybody. I'm
unbelievably honored to be a part of that journey.
No.
No, look, it's it was an amazing journey. We were all really overwhelmed by that experience, and it's I think to be nominated ever in anything is just such a special experience. So yeah, and the fact that it won Best Picture was crazy. I mean, we just none of us will ever forget that.
Especially how it unraveled, but of course.
That was quite a night.
So you talked about working with Barry just briefly, and how you suggested that the same method of being very into his process and him in yours, and so when you went on that journey with Moonlight, how did did it go in what kind of direction did it go in versus compared to working with Adam McKay? Where did it go with Barry?
Well, I think one of the things about both Barry and Adam is, I mean, there are a lot of similarities in the approach. Is that the very close collaboration, and also, getting involved pretty early in the process. With Moonlight, I read the script, and I was, it was the most beautiful script I'd ever read. It really was. I mean, it's just a work of poetry, and the early conversations that I had with Barry, I talked about, I was trying to figure out this music, like, what is this musical analog to poetry? Like, what would a musical poem, sound like?
Right.
And I wrote a piece of music in trying to imagine that for Barry and for the film. And it was for piano and violin, and I actually called it Piano and Violin Poem, because I was literally trying to channel this idea of like, oh, it's a poem, And I sent it to Barry, and he felt it just immediately connected with Little, and that piece is Little's theme.
Right.
And actually the demo I sent to him is in the movie. That's the track.
Wow.
So that was really our starting point, and it's always fascinating, I think, because sometimes those initial ideas, work like that, but more often than not, they don't. And I think even when they don't work, they tell you something, So for example, actually on If Beale Street Could Talk, early on, I read the book, read the script, talked to Barry before he shot If Beale Street Could Talk. And then his initial instinct to me for Beale Street was that he was imagining that the score would have horns and brass, that it would be that would be the sort of sound world of the film. And I went ahead and started experimenting with brass. So I experimented with trumpets and flugelhorns and French horns and cornet. And I wrote a piece of music that was, kind of trying to imagine that. This was before I saw the footage. And Barry really loved the piece. And when we put it up against the picture, it just felt like it was missing something. And what was interesting was this idea, it was the same kind of a process of imagining things, but it wasn't quite right. And we discovered that it was missing strings. And this world, this sort of world of like the sound of cellos and the ensemble of cellos, that felt like it just symbolized love in the film. And the film is really about love and injustice, and within the context of love, it explores so many different kinds of love. It explores romantic love, it explores erotic love, it explores the love that parents have for their children, it explores a kind of like divine, almost pure, unconditional love in a way too, between Tish and Fonny. And the way that we actually evolved the music over the course of the film was this interplay between brass and strings. And I think that I don't know, it was always, I guess, just fascinating to me the way in which you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what's going to work until you actually try it out, and that's why the process is so essential.
I mean, it's also about, getting to succeed and to find something that works, you do have to fail to get there.
Yes.
So
you have to. There's a path. There's a
Yeah,
path.
yeah.
There's a journey. And Barry always talks about it too. I mean, we start with certain ideas, but we don't know the destination. You know what I mean? We don't know where we're going to wind up. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. And I think that's what's so fascinating in a lot of ways, is that we ourselves are learning what the movie is telling us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we ourselves are responding to this picture and to these characters, and we're feeling things. And one of the things that I think Barry is so just incredible at is knowing the feelings that he's looking for. You know what I mean? Like, he's so able to feel connected to that. And it's so helpful for me as a composer, because then I'm able to, if he says to me, we need this to feel like joy or something like that, then I can say to myself, okay, let me try to imagine that based on everything that I'm also feeling, and based on all the reading and all of the ideas. But he knows what he wants. And I was most struck by that, I think, for the first time in Moonlight, where there were certain scenes where, I maybe came at it with a different perspective, and immediately he would talk about what he was feeling, and then I was like, oh wow, that's different, but that is, so powerful.
Right.
The best example, I think, is that there's a swimming sequence in Moonlight in chapter 1 where Juan is teaching Little to swim. And what's really fascinating there was that when I first saw it, I was saying to myself, oh, it's chapter 1, we've heard Little's theme. This gives us a chance to maybe explore the an evolution of Little's theme. Maybe it's like a chamber orchestra playing it, and maybe we're going somewhere else with it, because this is a beautiful moment in Little's life. You know what I mean? He's learning to swim. He's with Juan, who's his father figure, or who's taken on that role in some ways. And I showed it to Barry, and Barry was like, nope. He's like, no, man. He was like, this isn't like this happy moment in Little's life. He's like, this is actually, he's like, I want this to feel like a spiritual baptism.
Wow.
I want this to feel like the first day of the rest of Little's life, where we are starting to get a sense here of everything that is to come, and understanding the gravity of that. And immediately shifted my entire perspective on it. But, again, that's the powerful thing about, this kind of a dialogue with the director, where like I did not know that until not only did I talk about it with Barry, but also showing him something and giving him a chance to be like, how do you feel when you hear this? And he's like, I don't want that there.
Exactly.
So it's like, okay. But that was the thing where it was because that wasn't right. That we were then able to get to something that hopefully was, So
you're talking about, he tells you joy, and you try to then turn that into music. When you're searching for joy or sadness or whatever the emotion is, are you pulling from your own life experiences to what your embodiment of joy is, or are you like, this is what joy is for this character in this specific moment? I mean,
it's a great question. No, I think it depends on the project, and also depends on the director. I view myself as, my job is to listen. My job is to sort of receive this direction and this guidance from someone in a way. I'm sort of like trying to be a sort of a sponge for that, I guess.
Exactly.
And it's not about my life experience really at all. I think that would actually be not only not helpful, but maybe even problematic. I'm not bringing my sound to something.
Yeah.
I think actually I'm taking guidance and I'm saying, what is a feeling, like, in some ways I think I'm looking for or hoping for a sense of like maybe a universal kind of an emotion. I think things that we all are connected by. And, there's a thesis I think that we have when we're working, which is if we're feeling something together, the hope is that others would feel the same thing.
Right.
But again, maybe that's the value of the collaboration, where it's not just about the ideas, it's also about those feelings. Like I might be feeling something, but it's only right if Barry's feeling it.
Right.
And if we feel it together, then that feeling could be right.
Yeah.
So it's really like a conjoined kind of emotion. It's not it's not from me. And actually, my hope on films is that it isn't in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
My hope is that maybe I'm sort of more of a, I don't know, like a prism or something like that emotionally for things. Because I try to sort of almost like lose myself in a lot of ways,
right,
so that I can, resonate with the director. Like there's no, like for example, I hope I don't have a similar sound on different projects. I want to have the sound of that film.
Right.
No two films are the same for me. Every project is different, and I really strongly believe that every film should have its own sound and its own universe and its own world, because each film is its own world. So, and each film has its own directors. So that's that kind of, that's all my hope, I guess.
Yeah, no, it definitely comes across, because I think each one of your scores so far has been, it feels of that film rather than of you.
Right.
But it is of you, of course.
But I'm trying for it to be.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is maybe aesthetically that I feel that each cue or each piece that goes into a movie, the way in which it works, is that if it feels like it's like inside the world of the movie, then I think it works.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some things that pieces I'll try, where I'll say, oh, what about this? And sometimes they feel like they're just like sitting on top of the movie. They're like, they feel like they're not in the movie.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean?
It just sits on the top.
Yeah, it's just like, why won't it go? Yeah, why?
Yeah.
Where is this movie? It's not working, And I think that the weird thing with it is that when it works right. It kind of works right away.
Yeah.
I don't often find that a piece, you sort of get it to work. It doesn't really happen that way. I think there are pieces that just feel naturally like they are inside of a scene or inside of a film.
Yeah.
And again, that's the mystery. Like I have no idea what that is. Like I think it's different for every movie.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any rules on what that is. I really think ultimately it's just, are you in tune with what the director wants to feel? And if the director is feeling certain things and you're on that wavelength, then you can understand what is right for that movie.
Do directors like Adam and Barry, do they give you temp tracks? Or is it?
Not really. I think, with Adam and with Barry on both movies, I got involved, I was working with Adam while he was shooting it, and then with Barry I started talking to him before.
Right.
So like on Moonlight, we had Little's theme pretty much right from the beginning. Look, there are always moments where an editor will use a piece of temp music, of course, and directors can, but I think one of the things that is interesting about temp tracks is that music's really hard to talk about. It's really abstract. Even musicians have trouble kind of talking about it sometimes, and I think that the value that temp track could have is that it gives you a chance to say, well, what about that? What about whatever that's doing? Is it doing anything? And if you can sort of say, well, okay, so you're not looking for, a beat or, something, sad and intense. You're looking for something clearly kind of ambient, just the big picture kind of general broad things. That's something, it can simplify the conversation potentially.
For sure.
But I know in particular when Barry and I talk about it, anytime if there ever is a temp track, it's sort of like usually not helpful for us because, he'll be like, don't do that. That's
exactly.
I know that's not, or, and we've always had our success in going our own way, but I understand why temp can be used, and I certainly, there's good reasons to use temp, and there's not so great reasons.
For sure.
To use,
One of the most interesting ones I ever heard of was I went to a screening of Neon Demon. Nicholas Winding Refn, the director, was there with Cliff Martinez, and he said he temped it with Bernard Herrmann.
Okay.
And Cliff's style is completely not Bernard Herrmann. So he's like, I don't want you to do this, but here's what I'm feeling.
Right.
I thought that was very interesting.
That is interesting. Just as like hey, here's something.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
you know what? Look, it can be a starting point. You're like, hey, here's some. I think. But I think also temp and that story, for example, I think speak to the mystery of the process, which is what is the right music, and people, no one really knows.
Exactly.
But that's the fun of the process.
After 100
you don't know.
Some years of filmmaking, we still don't know.
We still don't know.
We're still figuring it out.
But I think, I think if we did know, it wouldn't be fun anymore.
Exactly.
Like if you knew exactly what to do, it would be, it'd be much more, I don't know, it would lose the magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
just looking at your overall process, of course it's going to be different for every film, but where does that first note come from? Like, do you have a place you go to do you like, is that first conversation? Is that looking at the script? I mean, with Adam and Barry, you're very lucky to be involved prior, but if you come to maybe a project later and you're kind of like the last stop, okay, here's the music, I'm sure it's going to be different there, but is there something that is it just sitting at home alone? Is like, do you just tinker on the piano? Like,
I think it's different on every project.
Yeah.
I'm usually there's a conversation with the director.
Yeah.
But then, alone time is good. I think I've always there's some films that I would go to the piano and but in some ways it's funny. Like I think piano definitely, like, as a pianist there's a lot of things that I can go to.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not helpful either. Because I think sometimes like it's almost too easy with an instrument that you know really well, because your hands like go to certain things without you even thinking, and you're like, like your hands go where they're used to going. And I think actually a lot of composition is doing things that put you outside of your comfort zone, so that you find new things, or that you're in different places. So it could be like playing in keys that you're not used to, or it could be not writing at the piano, So I mean, it's different every time. I think sometimes sometimes there's just a feeling right away that there's a certain sound world for a movie. I think that's often where I start. I guess I'm sort of talking about a project, and I'll imagine like some sort of an idea. Like with Moonlight, it was this idea of poetry. And I immediately sort of started thinking that was like a quiet piano and maybe a quiet violin with it. Just, I don't know why.
For Beale Street, what was the...
For Beale Street, well, Beale Street was interesting because Barry had given me that note of, hey, brass and horns, let's start there.
So
that was amazing, because getting that kind of assignment is like, okay, awesome, now I can start with this, and let me try and see what that's all about. So that was really... that was really fun, actually. Just getting the excuse to experiment, on these instruments, and so I did, and that was, but that was, that was just writing. That wasn't at the piano necessarily. That was just writing some ideas down, and then I went to the piano and was looking for certain chords. One of the things I was exploring with Beale Street as well was this idea of, what is the sound of 20th century New York? What's the sound of mid-20th century New York? The film set in the early 1970s, but also a lot of the source music that Barry was thinking of using, for example, the Miles Davis Blue and Green, or John Coltrane. They're really, mid 20th century jazz too. And I think there was an idea of, well, what is New York? New York has a jazz element, maybe. I'm from New York, and I think in some ways there's an idea of what is a New York sound.
Yeah, there is. For people who don't live in New York, they have that's kind of like, there's piano, there's jazz. You always think of more of like a noir, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's all these things that come to it, and I can't pin down exactly one thing. I think New York's a lot of things, obviously.
Yeah, it is. It's such a diverse
it's a
city.
very diverse and complex place. But I think, the combination of the ideas of jazz, of New York, of brass and horns, and I felt, what if I was writing pieces of music for brass, and then for strings and for cellos, and I was trying to think of a set of harmonies that maybe were jazz-oriented in some way, so sort of seventh chords and different dissonances, but then also, what would it sound like if I used those kinds of chords, but wrote the pieces as if they were like a 19th century chamber piece.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, what if
right.
you wrote a piece that had these chords, but it was like a cello octet? You know, that was those kinds of experiments, and that's kind of what I did. I followed those feelings and started experimenting with that. And as we evolved with the strings, it just kept going from there. But if that's maybe that's some way into remembering what I was thinking at the time. But it does become kind of a blur, honestly. I mean, you just sort of start doing things. You're like, oh, here we are. Yeah. And Barry and I will get in the room and we'll work for days on end. And we'll say to each other after like 2-3 days of working hours a day, we'll just be like, how'd we get here?
like when you're driving home, you don't realize you've arrived
exactly.
home. It's like, hey, wait,
no, exactly. Like you just go into this sort of flow state or something. Yeah,
exactly.
So.
Do you have you're very familiar with the piano, you're a pianist,
Sure.
but do you have like in your mind like, okay, I use strings for these emotions, I use brass for these emotions, or is it just like
no?
No. So you don't have like a bank of like ready to go type structure
Not really.
already?
No. I mean, I know intellectually of different things that you could do like that,
Right.
but I don't have any instincts like that.
I guess that's good because then you get stuck in into certain.
Well, it's funny.
forms.
I don't think any instrument actually should have any immediate connotation. I mean, like if you look at just the piano as an example, the piano can do anything. It can sound like anything. It can sound like any genre. It can sound like any emotion. Certain instruments, I think, naturally have certain feelings that are more immediately within them. Like the resonance that you get from a bow going across a string. That's a sound that a piano just physically cannot generate.
Right.
And so you're always going to have more of a human intimacy with a wind, brass, or string instrument than a piano in some ways. But at the same time, there's if you close mic a piano, there's an intimacy and a sort of feltiness that you get out of the hammers that is its own. So they're all different, but they can all each do this crazy range of things. I mean, brass can do a million things, so I think you can never sort of limit the range of possibilities of any instrument.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kind of looking at the whole overall process of what your job is from start to finish, what is your most absolute favorite part of what you do? Like from a start of the film to the end of when you've delivered it and it's mixed and it's finished, it's all done.
Best part is without question when you're sitting with the director and you discover something that you didn't know about the movie, or you there's a piece and it clicks in a way where it feels like it just like unlocks a scene to you, and those are the most exciting. I mean, I think actually like that's what it's for me. That's what it's all about, is those moments of discovery where you're just like, oh my god, that's crazy. Like this changes our whole, and I think for definitely in the films that we've been talking about, working with Adam, working with Barry, I mean, there are those moments where you just feel like you figure something out, and it's exhilarating, and it feels, those are those moments you really do feel connected to it, and you feel you just feel excited in a very special way. So without question, those are the best moments.
Is there a moment or in the whole process that you maybe dread? Is there something that like, oh, at this part, like, is there something like too mechanical, like you want to get through it, whether it's like maybe...
That's a good question. I think, the hardest part probably is towards the end of the process, when a film is just about to go to the mix stage, for the final dub. There's usually a lot of last-minute changes that are happening in the edit.
Yeah, those last-minute picture
those
changes.
last-minute changes, and at that point, you probably have recorded a lot of the music.
Right.
So there's always this question of like, do I have to rewrite these pieces, or is there an edit? How are we going to do? And I can be pretty particular about that, where I'm sort of like, if there's some pieces it's different than others, but I think at late stage, there's a flow and there's sort of an internal logic to some of these pieces, and that's maybe the most fearful moment is like, wait, is that scene changing?
Yeah, because once, once you're
like,
married to that
how
picture,
what am I gonna do to this piece, and what, that's probably the most fraught moment, yeah, but you figure it out.
Right. So just looking back at your younger self, is there something that you learned very early on in your career that really, that whether it was a mistake you made, whether it was a lesson that a mentor of yours taught you that you was like, this is great advice, and that really helped me, shape me, and put me on the right path, like, or to not make that mistake again, or something like that?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably, I don't know where I first internalized this idea or this feeling, but I think it might have been, I did the ASCAP Columbia workshop, right. And I worked with a really fantastic, teacher there, Alex Steiermark, who was actually Spike Lee's music editor, supervisor for years and years on a lot of those amazing films. And I think it was in that program where the idea of, how many different cues are possible for any scene, but really, really saying to yourself, what's the best one for this? You know, because I remember, I got into the class, and I remember, and I, just, thought I could write film music, and I remember, but I really wanted to, I was like, I think I know what I'm doing, I hope, and I remember going in, and they in the program they connect you with Columbia film school directors who are making their final film, and you work together and you put the you score the film, and then they pay for a great recording session with amazing musicians and the whole thing. And I remember there was a scene in that in the short that I was working on, and I wrote what I thought was a good piece for it, and we had to you have to play them for the class. And I remember Alex sort of saying, it works, but is that really like the best piece for this? Is the best cue? And at first I was like, wait, like what do you mean? Like I was like, oh, I think it's good, but then it made me think to myself, that really is the question. Like, is this really the best idea for this? It's not just does it work, because there's a lot of things that can work, but it's like, what's really, like, what is the scene really about? Like, what are we really trying to do here? And that, honestly, it actually just made me completely think about everything differently. It's a sort of moment where I was like, oh my God, he's right. There's like 100,000 things I could be doing here, and is that actually is that really what I think? So I think that's something that I always think about to this day. It's always like, what is the best? And best is obviously a very questionable word, maybe. What is the piece that I feel is the most powerful for what we're trying to do? Maybe that's a better way to say it. Like, what is the most connected piece to what we're trying to do here? And because I think about that all the time. So anyway, that was a piece of advice or learning that I had. Still think about with every single piece. So.
Is there any genre that you haven't tackled yet that you want to get your hands on? Like, do you want to do like a Marvel movie? Do you want to do like just a rigid horror film? Is there anything?
Sure, yeah. No, I would love to do a Marvel movie. I would do a Marvel movie in a second. I think that'd be an amazing experience. But also, I would love to do a horror movie. I've always thought horror was a great genre, and musically it's a great genre because the music in horror films is so connected with what's going on. So both of those would both be fun genres.
So you would take on any task that comes your way that push you in a different direction.
I'd love to. Like we were saying. I mean, I have I love the films that I get the chance to work on. I feel privileged to work on those films, but I think there are so many different types of films that I would love to try my hand at.
Absolutely. So to wrap up, if you could pick any other job on a film besides the composer, behind the camera or in front of the camera, whether it's a writer, whether it's a set designer, if you could just try it and just experience that, what would you pick?
That's a good question. I think, I have two answers maybe. The first would be, I think I'm very curious about film editing.
Yeah.
And I've had that chance to be closer to it over the past few years, especially through Hank, you know. So I would definitely be curious to try my hand at that. However, I think on a just theoretical level, something that I have never really done, but I'm fascinated with, would be cinematography. Like, I think that art form is something that I really don't technically know how any cinematographer does what they do, and I'm fascinated by that. So that would be, but I feel I feel I'm much closer to potentially trying around editing than I am with cinematography. But I think a great cinematographer, I mean, that's talk about, you know, it's visual poetry and how that happens. I'm very, very in awe of that.
I asked John Powell that same question, and he was, with full sincerity, said stuntman.
That's amazing. I do not want to be stuntman. Not even for a second.
Okay, Nicholas, no. Okay.
No stuntman. I'm totally cool not being a stuntman.
Well, Nicholas, I want to thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for talking.
It was such a great, fun time, and best of luck with everything in the future. It's always been great to listen to your music, and it really enriches the stories that we see. So thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.